Good evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, coaches and non-coaches, guests and guest speaker, you are most welcome to this evening's session. Today is Tuesday, the 21st of May. And today we're going to talk about something that is very, very dear to most coaches and non-coaches alike, for that matter. Um, Leaders for Coach, Coaching for Leaders. Our theme for today's session is ICF core competencies in action. And we're going to specifically be looking at domain B, which is co-creating the relationship. And for those of you who are familiar with the new core competency structure, ICF changed and remodeled it. So our topic of conversation today is competency 3, establishes and maintains agreement. And ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to please welcome our guest speaker, Tracy Sinclair, MCC. A big round of applause, please, for Tracy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So what I want to do is I just want to introduce Tracy properly. And I've just got a few slides that I'm going to take us through. Now, I just mentioned that our topic of discussion this evening is competency 3. But can I also just make one additional request? And Tracy is not aware of this, but I chose to also add competency 5, maintains presence. And guess what? There's going to be one exam question about competency 5 when I finish my part of the presentation, not Tracy's. Yeah? One exam question. So here we have Tracy, and tonight's session will qualify for 2 CCE units. Now, I actually spent some time reflecting on what people were saying they want to learn about competency 3 and generally about today's session. And I just put everything in a word cloud. And you can see here the variety of thoughts that people have come up with. They range from learning to improving to deepening. Some people have some thoughts about tools, agreements, and the list goes on and on. And I'm pretty sure that Tracy will do us justice with that. Now, a little bit about Tracy Sinclair, MCC, multi-award winning Master Certified Coach with ICF, dedicated to the development of the coaching profession and the coaching community. Named as one of the leading global coach winners of the Thinkers Marshall Goldsmith Coaching Awards 2019-2021, finalist of the Thinkers 50 Coaching and Mentoring Award in 2021, co-founded and leads Coach Advancement, which I am proudly an alumni of, where her work encompasses coaching, teaching, mentoring, supervising, and so on. She's highly focused on the growth and development of coaches globally as practitioners and catalysts for significant positive impact and change. She has published and she's a published author and co-authored the best-selling book, Becoming a Coach. Just by a show of hands, how many people have heard, seen, or read this book? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the list goes on. Thank you. Now, this book is now in its 2nd edition, but guess what? It's been translated into various other languages, Chinese, Korean, Hungarian, with several other translations in progress. And I've been made to understand that one day it would also become available on audio. So I've just got, copies of the books here. That's the 1st edition, 2nd edition, and this is the international edition. Tracy also specializes in working with organizations to support the development of leadership, coaching culture, and result through coaching. And she's a well sought after speaker on many coaching and leadership related matters for audiences around the world. She's deeply committed. In 2020, she founded Coaching with Conscience, CWC, which specializes in offering high quality coaching to particular types of organizations such as Mind and British Paralympic Association. She co-founded Coach Stars, which offers coaching and development of coaching skills for young people and leaders within the age range of 18 and 25. She's a mentor for Forefront. She's dedicated to the development of coaching profession and has volunteered her services to ICF for the past 12 years and counting. She was president of UK ICF 2013-2014. She has served as global director of ICF 2016-2021. She's been as treasurer, global chair in 2018, and immediate past global chair 2019. During 2021, she served as director at large of the ICF Global Enterprise Board, and she has held many other positions on ICF committees and task forces. Now, this one actually strikes a chord with me. ICW, which we've just concluded, ICW 2024, but in 2023, Tracy was a distinguished coach, and she was honored with the ICF Coaching Impact Awards Distinguished Coach due to her extraordinary contributions and leadership in the coaching industry. Her dedication to supporting coaches' development is evident through the creation of educational programs and the Pro Bono Alumni Benefits Package. Her strategic mindset and contributions have also been instrumental in the ICF development of this new ecosystem, right? The ICF, they call it the ICF family, the organizational structure. She has a passion for making coaching accessible to all, and it's demonstrated through her social impact initiative, which she launched. And this includes CWC, Coaching with Conscience, and Coach Stars, which I referred to earlier on. Tracy's profound impact on the coaching profession and society at large makes her a true champion of excellence and social transformation. If you want to get in touch with Tracy, these are her website links that you can reach her on. And you can also connect with her on various social media platforms. I will share this slide with people so that they can get first-hand links. And on behalf of ICF Nigeria, I want to say thank you, Coach Tracy, in advance, and also thank you to Coach Advancements. Now, final slide. For all our guests, if you want to get in touch with ICF Nigeria about coaching education and learning through ICF Nigeria, please send an email to education@icfnigeria.org. And that's the end of my slides, but I have one question for people, which will test competency 5, maintains presence. Here's the question. How many butterflies featured in the slides that I've just whizzed through? Answers in the chat box, please. And I'm going to hand over to Tracy while you're guessing how many butterflies.
Oh, that's fantastic, Ferry. Thank you. And I don't know how many butterflies there were, so I'm going to have to leave that to some other people to think about. But thank you so much for the introduction, Femi. I'm almost embarrassed that you're saying so many things about me, but it's very, very kind of you. And it's my absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you to ICF Nigeria as a chapter for inviting me, and thank you to all of you as board members for the work that you're doing to support your chapter. Having been someone that's spent hundreds and hundreds of hours volunteering for ICF. I know how much hard work it is that you're all putting in. So I really want to appreciate what you're doing, because you're really helping to put coaching really, really firmly on the map, not just in Nigeria, but also more broadly in Africa, which is such an exciting region for the profession. So thank you all for doing that. And thank you to all of you as coaches who have chosen to be here this evening, and also who have chosen to build some of your skills and give some of your time to this wonderful profession of coaching as well. I'm deeply passionate about how I really truly feel that coaching doesn't just help people progress with their goals, but it helps them progress with their lives, and really, really does have the capacity to fundamentally change people's lives for the better. And without wanting to in any way get involved in negativity or politics, I do think that our world is in desperate need of some good coaching right now. If you have a little look at some of the things that are going on around the world, it can be a little bit troubling sometimes. And coaching, I think, is potentially quite an important part of what could be a good solution. So thank you so much for coming along. I'm going to share a few slides with you, not too many slides, because I really want to be able to connect with you, most importantly. But I'd love to just share a few things that will, I guess, kind of anchor the work that we're doing this evening. And you will be able to have a copy of these slides afterwards if you would like. So I'll make sure that I get them sent across to Femi. And also, please feel free to engage with me. I don't want to be the lone person up here, if you like, just talking for 2 hours. I'd love to hear your voices, your contribution, your thoughts, your perspectives, because that's how we learn best together. So I will allow some time at the end anyway for questions and things like that. But please feel free to come in, pop your thoughts in the chat, stick your hand up if you want to speak, or just, if I don't see you, just come off mute and start speaking, because I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts as we go along. I'm normally relatively good at keeping an eye on the chat, but please forgive me if I miss anything. Maybe Femi can help me in the background if I'm missing something, or if I'm not seeing someone's hand go up or something like that. But I really would love to engage with as many as you as we possibly can.
So on that, Tracy, we've got Ahai would be looking at the chat box for us.
Oh,
Ahai, say hello.
Hello, Tracy. Good evening. I'm happy to look at the chat box for you.
Oh, wonderful, Echo. Thank you so much. Well, hopefully I'll be able to capture some of them, but if you think there's anything I'm missing, please just come in and help remind me. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. The only other thing before I get started that I would say is I've been fighting a winning battle with a bit of a cold this week. I'm glad to say it's a winning battle, so I'm definitely getting that cold over where it needs to be, which is not inside my body. But I have been, my throat does catch a little bit. So if I have a little bit of a coughing splutter, I might just put myself on mute for a moment just to grab some water. So apologies in advance if I do that, but hopefully, touch wood, we'll be fine. So let me share my screen then and just get us started a little bit. Okay. So just to put this into context a little bit, as Femi said, what we are doing this evening is looking at particularly competency 3, but I'd love to just contextualize this in terms of how it fits into the bigger picture. Obviously, there are quite a few of you on the call, and some of you may have done your training, your coach training some time ago, and some of your training for some of you might be more recent. But as Femi highlighted, this model that we currently have has been in effect since the beginning of 2020. And just to give you a little bit of background, since its establishment in 1995, the ICF has had probably, I would say, 3 to 4 competency models in its overall history. And they've become increasingly better in a way as time has gone by. If you imagine back in 1995 when everything first started, it was really very much like with any organization, kind of just pulling things together based on a few people that had their best thinking at the time. And then we had the model that was prior to this that we actually had in place for quite a significant amount of time. And in 2017, the ICF Global Board decided that it was more than enough time now, really, to have a review of the competency framework. And the ICF conducted the largest ever job analysis and research project into the skills of a coach that has ever been done. And that's one of the reasons why I love this model, actually, because of any set of competencies. Of course, you know, the ICF doesn't have exclusivity over what coaching competencies are, but the work that the ICF has done here is really such a rigorous piece of work that it gives us probably the best possible set of competencies that are available really at the moment across the world that really helpfully define what is the role of a coach. Excuse me. And as part of that research, there were multiple activities that went into that, which included things like desktop research, bibliography and literature reviews that looked into other coaching models and other forms of development, such as performance theory, behavioral sciences, coaching psychology, mainstream psychology, therapeutic models, etc. And then alongside that, hundreds and hundreds of coaches were surveyed, not just within the ICF, but outside of the ICF as well. And various task forces were set up all around the world so that we had input from different regions, different cultures, different languages, different interpretations of coaching. And then another activity that was undertaken, which I think is one of the most fascinating ones actually, is that an activity called analysis of critical incidents was done. And what that means is that quite a lot of recordings of coaching sessions with clients, with permission of course, were reviewed, and certain points were identified that would be described as a critical incident. And a critical incident is something that evokes or identifies a positive shift for the client in some way. So an example of a critical incident could be the client's energy shifting, or the client actually suddenly having an idea, or the client's mood shifting, or the client even stating that they've had an insight, or the client being very quiet because they're having to really think hard about something. And when these critical incidents were identified, the piece of work was backtracked almost frame by frame, if you like, or moment by moment, to see what it was that the coach did or did not do and said or did not say that could have had the potential to have evoked that awareness in the other person. And all of this analysis took 2 years in total, alongside one of the world's leading human resources research organizations called HUMRO. And the output was the competency model that we've got today, which was in some ways, thankfully, very, very similar to the one that we had before. And then for any of you who are familiar with the older model, I'm sure you will see some similarities and some cross-references. But there are also some elements within this model that are new or enhanced. And one of them links to what we're going to talk about today, which is competency 3. So what you're looking at here, of course, is not the full model, which you'll know, because sitting underneath this, which is really just the titles of the competencies, sitting underneath this is a lot more detail for each of those 8 competencies. And we won't look at all of those today. We'll just focus on competency 3. Interestingly, what you may also notice, which you may or may not have seen before, is that these competencies have also been clustered into what I'm calling here the being and the doing. And this is a way that within the ICF, when I was working on the boards, we would refer to them as the being and the doing competencies. And I think this is quite an important element to just highlight. What we mean by that is that the doing competencies, which are effectively 3 through to 8, are the ones that we can actually observe or hear in a coaching session, because the coach in that coaching session, every time they have a conversation, is going to be doing something, hopefully, to evidence and meet the criteria of those competencies. So they're very much focusing on what the competent coach does in order to coach effectively. And that's why our assessment system focuses predominantly on those competencies. But in reality, that is only half the story, because the idea is that in order for us to do coaching well, we have to be a great coach. And there's a real distinction between what I do and how I'm being. And so the foundation domain with competencies 1 and 2 are very much focusing actually not necessarily on what we do with our clients, but how are we being as professionals? Even potentially, how are we being as human beings? Because the idea is that the foundational competencies literally are what they say, a foundation. They're providing a platform from which we then do the doing of coaching. So today we're going to focus on number 3. And you could say, well, why start at 3? And the reason for starting at competency 3 is predominantly because it is the initial competency in the doing cluster. The only other thing I would want to say about this competency is really very much that it's not necessarily something that only happens at the beginning. If I was to possibly have the chance to change anything about this model, I would change the fact that we have numbered them chronologically 1 through to 8, because it invites people to think that they happen in a chronological order, that we do 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and so on and so forth. And what I would offer up is that it very much is not something that happens in a sequential order. That the minute we start establishing the coaching agreement, in order to do that, we probably need to draw upon all of the other competencies in service of establishing that agreement. So I like to think of these competencies almost as a wonderful big pot of food, almost, with some beautiful ingredients in there, and they're all mixed up, swirling around together. And if we don't have quite enough of one of them, then the bowl of food won't taste quite so good. So we want to have the right mix and the right blend each time. So when the ICF did the job analysis, one of the key themes that came out of the research, there were several of them. One of them was that it was felt that we needed an expanded understanding of establishing agreements in coaching. So there was a feeling that the previous model, and therefore the teaching that came out of that model, was possibly not emphasizing enough the significance of that process and guiding coaches enough on how to really do that well. And so the one that we have now is going into a lot more detail about that. And that's really what I would love to share with you today. A few other reasons why this one is important. First of all, from a complaints perspective, I'm very happy to share that the ICF gets very, very, very few complaints about coaches' behaviour and the way they operate with their clients. But the few complaints that do come through, usually when they're researched and analysed and investigated, excuse me, they normally find their route back to a bit of a flaw in competency 3, that competency 3 wasn't done quite thoroughly enough, that has led the piece of work to be open to misunderstanding, confusion, etc., that potentially leads to a complaint. The other thing is, just from a purely practical perspective, if you want to be successful in passing ICF exams for credentials and things, if you don't have good scores in establishing and maintaining agreements, it's very, very hard to get strong scores in some of the other subsequent competencies, because establishes and maintains agreements is something that is really, really considered to be, you know, paramount almost to the piece of work. If you don't understand what the agreement is, or you've not established that fully with the client, then how can you evoke awareness? And how can you actually track whether your goal has been achieved? So, excuse me for one moment. I'm just going to grab a little bit of my water. Oops, where are we? Okay, thank you. So, focusing in a little bit on what we're going to look at then today is, we've already really focused on the first part, which is to try to position why this competency is so critical. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about what we call the 3 levels of agreement within this competency, then to dive into the competency a little bit more, to just really more deeply understand. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about tripartite agreements in coaching, which of course is a very important part of the work for when we're working in an organisation perhaps, or when there's a sponsoring party. And also look at then how this competency does almost show up potentially throughout all of the others, and it forms a thread that runs through the whole piece of work. When we've done that, I'd love, if there's time, which hopefully there will be, I'd love to do a brief demonstration just of this competency with someone. And I can see from my chat messages that Charles has very, very kindly volunteered to be my client for that piece. So thank you, Charles, in advance for that. We'll hopefully come to that in a little while. And we can set that up when we get close to that part. But it would be nice to try to bring some of our discussions to life with a bit of a demonstration, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time left for any final Q&A. But apart from when Charles and I are coaching together, please feel free, other than then, to bring in any questions or comments or observations that you would like to as we go through. So, getting stuck in then, 3 levels of agreement. So this is where I'm going to invite some participation from some of you. So please do share some of your thoughts in a moment, either verbally or in the chat as you prefer. When the research came out that indicated we needed an expansion of the coaching agreement, the outcome of that exploration was the definition of what's called here these 3 levels of agreement. And part of the reason for these 3 levels is to really help us understand what is the depth and breadth of the contracting process. Because as we probably, hopefully know, contracting is not just asking the person what they want to work on that day. There's a lot more to it than that. And so we have these 3 levels here, and I'm sure that some of what you're seeing on the screen there is pretty obvious, but the first one could be interesting and worth just exploring a little bit. So the first level of agreement is what is called the agreement for coaching relationship. So this is where I'd love to get some thoughts and some ideas from yourselves. What could that mean, do you think? That part of my responsibility as the coach when is setting up the piece of work, part of my responsibility is to explore and establish an agreement for coaching relationship. Any thoughts? There's no right or wrong here, so anything goes. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you want to pop something into the chat. What could that mean? Agreement for the coaching relationship. Any thoughts on what that might involve? So Samuel, thank you for starting us off. More on the ethical part. Yeah, so thank you, Samuel. So let's just explore that a little bit. And Samuel, feel free to add more if you want to, or someone else. So Samuel's absolutely onto something here, that this part of the relationship touches on ethics. And I can see now that Tunde's put something in that links to that, which is confidentiality. Yeah, so part of establishing an agreement for the coaching relationship is to have clarity on confidentiality boundaries and how that works. Boris has also put in that it's to explore and discuss the coaching process itself. Absolutely, because perhaps we don't actually have a relationship if something other than coaching is required. So really having an understanding of the process of coaching, and then as Erko has said here, understanding what coaching is, and of course, therefore, what it is not, is very important. Exploring, as Mary's bringing in, an understanding here of accountability. Tolu has put in here how we want to work together in this relationship, understanding what coaching is and is not. Yetunde has put in understanding roles, fabulous. Tokumbo has said knowing what you want out of the coaching, absolutely. So this is fantastic. So all of these things are starting to think about, do we have a relationship? First of all, is coaching actually the thing that we want? Is that the right? Is that the right modality? And how do we want our relationship to work? So things like confidentiality, exchange of information, how we might hold the client accountable, etc., etc. Now, there could be other things in here as well. So please feel free to keep adding any other thoughts if they come to you, but I'm going to just throw a few into the mix as well here. Is what could help my relationship with the client? What might the client feel I need to know about them that would be helpful to us working well together? What might get in the way of us working well together? Other things that are coming into the chat, understanding the scope of the contract. Yes, so what's included in this work and what is excluded in this work? surfacing their level of commitment, do's and don'ts, providing clarity. So there's a lot of different things in here around a broad conversation of, do we have a relationship? What is that relationship? What will help that relationship? And what could get in the way of that relationship? So again, we've got another lovely thought coming into the chat here. Understanding, therefore, elements of the contract around time, boundaries, clarity, and roles. So what is my role as the coach? What is their role as the client? Now, all of those things are very, very useful to establish. What if I was to now add in an S to the end of relationship, and I was to say agreement for coaching relationships? Where might that take our thinking? Now who are we potentially considering or including in this discussion, do you think? Samuel, thank you. The organisation, tripartites, sponsors, we've got sponsor coming in, clients' expectations of the coach, etc., and vice versa. Fabulous. So, and I also wanted to just capture one that someone said a little bit earlier. Mocha was saying, determining compatibility with the client. Of course, absolutely. Do we even have compatibility to have a relationship? Even you could even extend this a little bit further. In some cases, perhaps there's even more than 3 people involved. In some coaching engagements, perhaps there is an HR representative that is involved. In some coaching relationships, perhaps there is a project owner that is involved. Someone here from Madalena from ICF Portugal has put in here platform stakeholders. Absolutely. So if you are working as an associate coach for a coaching platform or a broker of coaching, they are also a stakeholder, and therefore you have some kind of a relationship with them. So already, before we even get to grips with starting the work, we can already see that there is a range of things to discuss and explore and agree around these various relationships that are part of the engagement that we're working in. In addition to that, what also sits into this level 1 is something that one of you was just touching on a little bit earlier, which is the logistics. So up at the relationship level is where we might be having discussions around if it's appropriate, what are the fees for the piece of work? How many sessions are we likely to be having? How frequent are those sessions? Are they face-to-face or virtual? How long are they? How long will they go on for? What is the budget, etc., etc., etc. So the logistical part all sits in there as well. As you can imagine, therefore, when you think about this, that level 1 may not just be one single conversation. It's quite possible that establishing the coaching relationship or relationships could be a process rather than a one-off event. It could be a number of conversations that you're having with different people. And therefore, it might not be something that just happens, you know, on a particular day. Before we move on to the others, any thoughts, any questions or observations, insights, reflections that's coming up for any of you just around that exploration that we've done on that level 1 before we move on? Yeah, so we've got here, it is not a closed subject until the end of a coaching relationship. It is open to add up. Absolutely. So this, as with anything with an agreement, we might revisit this, mightn't we? We're laying the foundation of that agreement but it's something that is live and dynamic, and we might come back to it. Oh, Samuel's raising a great question here. When do you start charging from level 1? So that's an interesting thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts, any of you. When would you start charging for a piece of work? Any thoughts on that? Where are we? Just seeing if anyone's got any thoughts on when to start charging. I mean, just to throw in a few ideas while anyone else is just coming up with their thinking here. And Gotchi's put in there maybe level 1 or level 2. Personally, the unhelpful answer, I think, is it depends. In many cases, not all, but in many cases, what I notice in the practice of our profession is that quite often chemistry conversations, which is one of the very early conversations we need to have to even establish if there's any work to do together, that most of the time chemistry conversations are done free of charge. I have heard of some coaches charging for chemistry conversations, and that is a choice that we make. There's nothing anywhere in ICF guidance that I'm aware of that says we're not allowed to charge for those. But we tend to find practices that many coaches don't charge for the chemistry, but quite often, once there is an agreement to a piece of work going ahead, then you would start charging from there. So it could be that some of the other elements of level 1 and then definitely into level 2, as Gotchi is saying, could easily be fee earning and chargeable. Madalena is also saying here, in theory, since you meet the client as your price includes the time and effort for all the pre-coaching work, in practice from session 1 onwards. Yeah. So there's slightly different practices, but generally speaking, I think my practice is, and a lot of people that I'm aware of, is that chemistry sessions are often done free of charge, and then when there is agreement that you're going to work together, the rest of it is chargeable from there. So once we've got an understanding of those coaching relationships, and I'm just picking up on something else that someone popped into the chat earlier, which was, I think it was something around the priority of, yes, Tosin was saying, are you going to talk about how to prioritize different stakeholders? Oh, that would be an interesting one. Tosin, are you open to just sharing a little bit more around that? Because that's a really fascinating topic. Would you like to maybe either pop something else in the chat or come off mute for a moment and just share your thoughts on that one?
Hi, Tracy.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much. It's coming from the earlier conversations where we're talking about what relationships might be involved. So sometimes there's the organization, there's HR, there's the line manager, there are all sorts of people in there. So ideally, the coachee is the main client. But when you have all these other relationships also there, how do you prioritize those? Because maybe the organization is paying and they're giving you a guideline as to what they want. So, and of course, we don't share what we do with the client, with the organization, but they have a mandate which they've given you. So how do you sort of wrap them all in together and ensure that you're fulfilling the different mandates that you've been given?
Yeah, thank you, Tosi. I mean, that's just such a great question. And I don't have a simple answer that says you prioritize them like this or like that, because, and Femi will know this, when I give my unhelpful answer of it depends, I think that it will depend very much on the nature of the engagement and the stakeholders that you've got there. But for example, your primary priority is, of course, to the person that you are coaching. That's your core client. However, at the same time, we also may have a sponsor who is also, in effect, potentially also your client, because they are the one that is supporting and sponsoring the work, and they're also perhaps the one who is funding the work. And so it's very important, and we'll come to that when we look at tripartite agreements. It's very important that we have transparency around establishing what are the needs and expectations of both parties, so that in an ideal world, we are satisfying both parties' expectations as part of the process. However, if ever there was a sense of that being a little bit out of balance, that invites, in a way, an exploration of an opportunity to recontract, to explore what might need to be adjusted here to bring this back into something that is that feels in balance. The other side, I guess, where some great conversations around this could come up would be to look is when we were to look at competency 1, for example, and ethics, because some of the ethical considerations could surface in our thinking if we feel that there's a bit of a mismatch in the priorities. And so potentially I would say that how you prioritize them is by almost getting those parties to tell you collectively what all of the priorities are, rather than us saying this person is more important than that person, but always with the open intention that our primary focus is on the person that we're working with. So without that, I think that's about the most helpful answer I can give, Tosin, at the moment, because I think it really will depend from situation to situation. Thank you for your question. So let's move on for a little bit. The other two are really much more straightforward. At level 2, once we've got the relationships cleared and established, we then would have a conversation around establishing some kind of overarching plan for the whole package of work. For example, we may have agreed to work with someone for an hour a month for 6 months, for example. And so this level 2 would be to say, across those 6 months that we're working together, what is the overarching goal that you want to achieve? And what is the outcome in 6 months' time that you want to have? So it's quite possible that that level 2 could also involve someone other than the client, perhaps. That could also involve the sponsor or the line manager as part of a tripartite. But then we get to level 3, which is when we're establishing the agreement session by session, conversation by conversation, which is then just us with our client. So you can hopefully see this cascade of level 1 being the groundwork to establish the agreement. Then we start to have an overarching, almost like a project plan, if you like. And then session by session, we're establishing clarity with the client. And it's that level 3 that is the part that is assessed when we send our recordings in to the ICF. They're not necessarily listening out for levels 1 and 2 here. They're listening out for level 3. So let's just see how then this plays out into this competency. And I'm hoping, please do challenge me if this isn't clear, but I'm hoping that the rest of the competency will now make a lot of sense in terms of how it sits and where it sits under those 3 agreements or those 3 levels. If you have a look at, first of all, the title of this competency, establishes and maintains, as with all of the competencies in this model, it starts with an active verb, that all of the titles start with active verbs. And what's really interesting here is that this one doesn't just say establishes agreements, it says establishes and maintains agreements. So very much to the point that someone brought in earlier in the chat, this is not a one-off process. It's something that informs the work all the way through and is something that we may want to be revisiting, we're checking back on, we may even change because we know that goals and goalposts change. But if we, thank you, Emmanuel, it is absolutely an ongoing process. And you'll see in the definition here that the definition says that the coach partners with the client and relevant stakeholders to create clear agreements about the coaching relationship. So let's just pause there. So there we have that level 1 that we've just explored. It then goes on to say that we create clear agreements, not just about the relationship, but about the process, the plans, and the goals, which starts to speak to level 2. And then in the next sentence, it says that the coach establishes agreements for the overall coaching engagement, level 2, as well as those for each coaching session, level 3. So hopefully we can now see that in that definition that each of these 3 levels is embedded. And I'm hoping that as you now look at some of the sub-competencies, this one's quite a long competency, so it runs across 2 slides. I'll share the other one in a moment. You can start to see, hopefully, how each of the 11 sub-competencies feed back up into that definition. So item number 1 here, explaining what coaching is and is not, that's clearly part of that, what we said originally was level 1. Reaches agreement around what is and is not appropriate, part of level 1. Reaches agreement about guidelines and specific parameters and logistics, level 1. If we go on to look at some of the others, partners with the client and relevant stakeholders to establish the overall plan, level 2. Partners with the client to establish compatibility. Someone already popped that one into the chat, that's part of level 1. And then we see items 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, that if you look at the end of each sentence, it says, in the session, in the session, in the session. So those items are very, very much the ones that we are looking to really, really thoroughly cover every time we connect with our client. And then the last one, partners with the client to end the coaching relationship in a way that honours the experience. So that's really starting as we mean to go on, so that this competency doesn't just talk about the beginning of the work, it talks also about how do we bring the overall engagement to a close. So just sharing in summary, there are a number of key areas, therefore, to really establish the agreement as thoroughly as we possibly can. There are 4 key areas that we want to spend some time on. We want to explore thoroughly with the client, which is really getting clarity and alignment of what the goal is of the piece of work, what outcome does the client want to have from this work, and also to understand how will they know that they've got that outcome, what will be different for them, how might they act or feel differently as a result of the conversation that you've had with them. And then something that's also really important is to try to get underneath the topic a little bit and not just focus on the what, the topic, but really focus in on who is the person in front of me that's bringing this topic And why is it important to them? What is significant about this piece of work for them? And so that really helps us to not just, and I'm sure with some of the work, I think you've had a lovely session perhaps with Marsha Reynolds, who is very famous for her work around coaching the person and not just the topic, is that ultimately we're wanting to support a person to grow and evolve and learn and develop. We're not trying to just resolve a topic. We're actually wanting to use the topic as a vehicle to support the development of that person. And the last part, which is often something that's overlooked, which I think is a really important part, and for assessment purposes at PCC at least, this is very important to explore, is to understand the territory, as I call it, and not just the goal. If the goal that the client has stated is that straightforward, then why are they not already doing it? So one of the things that we want to try to establish is in order for us to do this work together and establish this goal, what might we need to navigate? What might we need to deal with? What might we need to address or resolve? For example, to give a little bit of a metaphor, if we were doing a physical road trip together and we were to say, well, where I want to go is I want to go to France, let's say. We want to make a trip to France. We know a goal. We might even know why they want to go to France, because they've never been or something. We would have an obvious measure of success because we'd actually be able to be in France and perhaps take a picture of ourselves next to the Eiffel Tower. But what about how we're going to get to France? Going to France would be a very, very different experience if I was to catch an aeroplane or if I was to go by boat. It would be an even more different experience if I was to decide to take a bicycle to go to France. And it would be different again if the weather was very fine and clear, or if the weather was incredibly stormy and there were tornadoes. So the nature of the circumstances surrounding the topic are going to inevitably have a bearing on how we and our clients navigate our way towards that goal. So it's not just establishing what they want to achieve, it's establishing what are the circumstances that we will work through in order to successfully achieve that. So I'm just checking in with you if that, before we move on to tripartites a little bit, what, if any, questions, thoughts or observations does that give rise to, this idea around these 4 key areas? So Madalena is saying, have a clear vision of what success of the session looks like for the client. Absolutely, Madalena, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to pick up actually on a question that Samuel popped into the chat a few minutes ago, which was, when do you establish boundaries, client and sponsor, in this case? So let's just talk a little bit about tripartite contracting. And then once we finish that, we can maybe think about exploring a demonstration. So tripartite contracting or 3-way contracting is what the term that is often used for this 3-cornered relationship that is myself as the coach, my client or the coachee and someone who is sponsoring the piece of work. And we know that the sponsor could be the line manager, they could be any number of people. It's whoever is mutually established as the sponsor of the piece of work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions, any of you, around what is important to establish here in this three-way conversation. What are some of the things that we are exploring, getting agreement on, and covering? So Madalena's popped in, confidentiality, absolutely. So here's a question. If we agree that the piece of work is confidential, and a little bit later on in the work, I happen to bump into the sponsor, and the sponsor, or even the sponsor, calls me or emails me and says, "Hey, Tracy, how's your work going with whoever the person is that I'm coaching? I'd like an update on how the work is going." What are your thoughts on what my response is to that question? Great. So Madalena's offered up, we asked back, what is your view? Yeah, so put the question back to them. Yeah, other thoughts? Clarity of stakeholder expectations. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Any other thoughts coming up when the boss comes in? So Samuel's saying it's based on initial agreements, and Boris is saying, yeah, ask the coachee directly. Absolutely. So this is where a three-way conversation is very important, so that the boss, the sponsor, knows that I am not going to just have an offline conversation and share the details of the conversation I'm having with the coachee. Doris is saying, speak with the client. Sunny's come up with a great one here. He's cooperating and showing up for the sessions. Beautiful. Yeah. So we can say, yes, the sessions are happening. They're going ahead, but we're not actually disclosing that information. So this is one of the things we want to make really, really clear up front. Part of the reason why we can sometimes get ourselves into difficult situations is when we've not made all of this clear up front, and then suddenly we're having to put that confidentiality piece in because the sponsor has asked us. What else do you think is important perhaps to discuss in this three-way? Anything else? Sharing professional boundaries, first level agreement should settle this ahead. Absolutely. We should hopefully have a lot of clarity already for this. What the goals for coaching are. Yeah. And alongside the goals, perhaps also the measures. People's willingness and interest. Thank you, Charles. Emmanuel is saying expectations from each party should be clearly defined. Absolutely. So the idea here is that we are having an open, transparent conversation with both parties in the room at the same time, rather than a separate conversation with the sponsor and a separate conversation with the coachee, so that there is no hidden agenda. There's nothing that either party doesn't want to say in front of the other, that the transparency is there around what the work is and why the work's important. And of course, going back to one of your comments around the priority of sponsors, the sponsor also has a right to have expectations, don't they, around the work. The key thing is what are those expectations, and do the sponsor and the coachee agree and feel aligned that the work that we're going to do is appropriate and feasible. So Kanimo's put in here, but many sponsors usually want to report afterwards. So beyond stating that the client cooperated and completed their sessions, what else should be mentioned? Thank you very much, Akanimo. Great question. And We've also got a response here of, yes, they do, however, not the details. Absolutely. So headline topics. Thank you for popping these in. So we may give a very high level, this is what's been covered, but we're not going into detail. And that's something also to agree in this three-way conversation, is what information are we going to exchange between each other, so that you are not caught off guard, if you like, by thinking, oh gosh, we didn't talk about this. I wonder whether I should be saying this or not. So it's really, really helpful to protect you as well as the other two parties, to really have clarity on who will share what with who, when and why. And in an ideal world, anything that is an update on the work should ideally come from the coachee, surely, because they are the one with the intact in-company relationship with their manager. Our role as the coach is not to interfere in that line management relationship or to assume responsibility and take over that line management relationship. So the perfect person to update the sponsor is really the coachee themselves. Anything else that's coming up for you around this model in terms of questions or observations? I can see another couple of thoughts have come in here. Samuel said initial agreement on when feedback is given and who should be present. Absolutely. You may also want to be including measures here. So what kinds of measures of success might be useful. It can be useful to think about quantitative as well as qualitative measures if you can, so that there is clarity and agreement between the sponsor and the coachee of what do they think needs to be in place in order to have evidence that something positive has come out of the work. Madalena's popped a question in here. When do these conversations take place? Initial and the end is my experience. Absolutely, I would agree, Madalena. I would say that the standard procedure would be that you begin and end a coaching package with the three-way. So you're setting everything up at the beginning, you're doing the work, and then you're coming back at the end to review, close the work down and agree any next steps before you pull away. In some coaching engagements, I have found if they're longer ones, there is sometimes a request for a midpoint review. So when I've worked with people, sometimes perhaps for a year, if they've been in a new role or something like that, we might have a 6-month review or even a quarterly review. So there's no fixed rule on that. That's whatever everyone in your group feels is useful. Other people are adding in, yes, initially, midway and closing. So there's another thought in there. Important that agreements such as feedback to who, when, etc. settle from the beginning. Absolutely. How much of feedback can you give to a sponsor? I think the rule of thumb here would be as little as possible, because we're really wanting to maintain that confidentiality between ourselves and the coachee. And in this three-way conversation at the beginning, invite the sponsor and the coachee to update each other rather than perhaps us being the person that's doing that. Some other thoughts coming in here, depending on the length. I sometimes have a midway review. Absolutely, that's great. We've also got the sponsor should have discussed outcomes with the coachee ahead of the discussions with the coach. Yes, so you've got some groundwork coming in. State clear conditions when the coachee may request to stop work with the current coach and ask for another coach. That's a fantastic one. You know, how do we end this? And we know from our code of ethics that a client has has the right, as does the coach, actually, the right to terminate a coaching engagement if they feel that the work is not working, it's not of value, or something has shifted in the needs of the client and that is not being satisfied by the work that they're doing together. So that could also be discussed. Steer clear of conditions when the coachee may request to stop work with the I've just said that one, apologies for that. Can you please also share an example of qualitative? Yeah, so a qualitative one could be, let's say that one of the goals of the work was that the client demonstrated a greater level of clarity when presenting their thoughts in a meeting. One of the qualitative measures of success there could be to invite the coachee to seek feedback from their colleagues around how clear they feel the person's presentations are now versus how clear they are at the end of the work. And that would be a subjective measure. It's not quantitative in terms of numbers, but it's a qualitative, i.e. subjective perspective, but a subjective one nonetheless that is valued. So that could be an example. It could also be confidence within the coach. Let's say within the client, let's say the client feels they're very comfortable presenting to their team, but they feel very uncomfortable presenting to clients externally. And you might take a qualitative measure of their confidence before you start the work. And later on, you might establish where their confidence is now. And they might be able to describe qualitatively how it's changed, because perhaps now they feel that they're not losing sleep the night before. So it's not quantifiable statistically with numbers, but we're able to give a sense of, I know it's changed because of X, Y, or Z. Qualitative measures are really valuable in coaching because we can't always quantify everything. So the qualitative measures are really useful. And this is what some of you may be aware, but in coaching, we try to move away a little bit from the concept of ROI in coaching, return on investment, because ROI measures tend to more exclusively focus on statistical measures of success. And coaching sometimes can find statistical measures of success, but not always. And so what we try to do with coaching is to move more to a model that's called ROE, return on expectations. And part of this three-way work is to really establish what are the expectations that everybody has, and how do we qualify or quantify those expectations by trying to collectively articulate some measures of success. So I'm just pausing there. I'm going to just come off of screen share for a moment just to connect with you. Excuse me, apologies for my coughing. I'm going to maybe invite us potentially to think about a little demonstration in a moment, but just before we do that, just checking in if there's anything else that this gives rise to in terms of your questions, your observations. Otherwise, we might go into a demo in a moment if Charles is still willing to join me. And then we can spend a bit of time after that debriefing that a little bit as well. Okay, so I think the chat has slowed down a little bit there, so I'm assuming that means we're ready to make.
I have a question, Tracy.
Oh, yes, go ahead, please.
You know, I just thought, speaking of agreements, the sponsor, you have an agreement with the sponsor, and then you have to have an agreement with the client now, right? So you have agreements in context now is physical agreement signed, right? So you have an agreement, a separate agreement with the sponsor, and then a separate agreement signed with the client. So you have two separate agreements when this sort of tripartite relationship exists. Is that correct?
Thank you, Charles. It's a great question. It could be two separate documents, and it could also be consolidated into one. So things like establishing the things that we've talked about around confidentiality, what our roles are, what coaching is and is not, what the measures of success might be, what the goals might be. All of those things could be contained into one collective document, so that we're not necessarily having two sets of documentation. The only thing that would be maybe different would be if I'm then establishing any session by session goals. That might be done just with my client. However, most of the time, those are probably not even necessarily written down formally, and we might be capturing them together, but we might not have a formal contract for those. So in order to have clarity and to avoid multiple documents, my instinct as I'm sharing this with you would be, wherever possible, try to consolidate it to one document, because that helps with alignment and transparency, that everyone's looking at the same thing.
Thanks, Tracy. So that means the sponsor signs, the client signs, and then yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could easily get those three signatures on the documentation if that's what you wanted to do. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
I think it's also good practice, while we're just on that note, I think it's also good practice, and some of you I'm sure may already be doing this, is that your contract is one thing and our code of ethics and our ethical conduct is another, and they're very, very, very closely linked. And so it's very good practice, I would say, to have a contract that highlights that as an ICF member, as an ICF trained coach, etc., you abide by the code of ethics, and you could, some coaches even attach an appendix of the code of ethics to their contract. You don't have to do that. I mean, it's quite a lot of documentation if you send them all of the code of ethics. But what you could do is include a hyperlink in your contract to say, you know, please do feel free to have a look at this code here, so that you're really then doing your due diligence to say, you know, we actually have a code of conduct that we're operating from here. And of course, quite a few actually of the things that we've just been discussing together around tripartite agreements is actually contained in what we ought to be doing in the code of ethics. So by contracting really thoroughly in this way, we're also meeting that code of ethics at the same time.
So Tracy, you've got an ethical question. It borders on ethics, doesn't it? How were you advised to handle a situation when a coachee is using coaching session paid for by the stakeholder, sponsor, to explore a search for a job in another company?
Yeah, it is a tough one. I think this is where the contract is really important, and it does depend on what was agreed. So, for example, I have actually had coaching engagements in the past that have been paid for by the organisation, and they are in service of supporting the line report, the coachee, to find another job. So it's a totally transparent piece of work because that organization is wanting to support that individual in their next career move, even though it might be a career move outside of the organization. So that's not unheard of. It can happen. But if, for example, the contract is with the tripartite contract, if the tripartite contract says that the goal is to help this individual improve their leadership of their team, and then partway through the client says, well, actually, I want to leave and I want you to help me search for another job, that actually now is a different contract. It's a change of contract. And it is a bit of an ethical dilemma for a coach, but what ideally we want to be doing there is to actually have a conversation initially with our client to say, so this is a different goal. And I need to talk to you, therefore, about how do we manage that? Because in an ideal world, what we want is for the client to actually be open with their organization to actually say, you know, they're going to leave, or can they use the coaching for this work? Now, some clients may not be, for obvious reasons, may not be comfortable with doing that. To get around that, one of the things that I often do in contracting in 3 ways is to actually highlight that a relatively common outcome from coaching can be that the person leaves the organization. And that's not rare. It happens quite regularly, because when coaches, or clients rather, review their lives, their careers, sometimes they do make different choices with their life. And it can be an outcome of coaching that someone does decide they want to leave. And that could almost be something that could be explored in the 3-way to say, what if that was to happen? What if that was to surface in this work? Is that okay? Would that be an acceptable part of this work? And some organizations would say, yes, absolutely. And some other organizations would say, no, you know, this would only be to coach around the goal that we've initially stated. So then if the client does say, well, you know, I now think that I want to leave, we've got a very clear agreement that we had in the first place that says, okay, we've got a slightly different contract now and we need to just explore. So it's not an easy situation. I don't have an easy answer, because what that actually invites is a difficult conversation, because we would need to just explore what is the contract now. But we would have that conversation with the client, because what we would not want to do is to breach the confidentiality that we have with that client and go off to the boss and say, oh, hey, did you know they want to leave now? So we would not want to breach that confidentiality. But at the same time, the client is also the sponsor is also our client to a certain extent, because they're sponsoring and paying for the work. So it's a really, really good question that Samson is bringing in here. And it's a tricky one. It's not an easy conversation, but it does invite real clarity of conversation, either up front or with the client to say, what do you want to do about this? Rather than us just carry on regardless, because otherwise we're effectively, in some ways, knowingly breaching the contract with the sponsor by going off piste and doing something completely different and not letting the sponsor know. So I don't know if that's not a it's not a simple answer, but it's probably the one that I would offer up in terms of the best practice. Does that help? I'm just checking in there with Femi and Sammy. Does that help to clarify a little bit?
More for Samson. Samson? Is Samson still on the call?
Sure, Samson's there.
And you got another question, Tracy, from Habiba.
Yes, I can see Habiba's here. Is this when a coachee says they want to leave their organization? Is that the one you're referring to, Femi?
All right, it's actually a comment rather than a question.
Yes.
That's the one, yeah.
So when a coachee says they want to leave the organization, I let them know that my assigned role from the client or sponsor is to support them in improving their leadership skills or performance in their role. Naturally, that would increase the coachee's employability anyway. Absolutely. What an elegant answer. So you know, you're still in service of the work that you're doing with them, but of course it's going to help them with another job. And as I always say, I find that apart from signing the agreement, also having a three-way conversation at the start, middle, and the end is important to ensure alignment or not. Absolutely. I mean, this is really, really good practice. So I'm just mindful, just keeping a little bit of an eye on our time. It would be lovely if you all would like to, and if Charles would like to, it'd be nice if we were to do a quick demonstration of a piece of contracting only. So just the first part of the conversation. And when I talk here about the contracting, I'm talking about just that level 3, which is the agreement for the piece of work itself, rather than the compatibility and the logistics and everything like that. So I'm really just trying to offer a demonstration of what we would be looking for almost to fulfill the session by session agreement. So just to set this up logistically, and Femi or one of your colleagues, you might be able to help me in a moment. It would be good to put the view on in a way so that Charles and I can kind of see each other. And I'm going to invite in a moment everyone else to go. That's it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Femi. So that just Charles and I can kind of feel like we're in a room together without hundreds of other faces looking at us. And I can see that everyone else is pretty much, thank you so much, have gone off camera there. So that's wonderful. So just before we go into this, just a little bit of logistics, Charles, if I may. My thinking here was that perhaps we would imagine that we were going to have an hour's coaching session on something, but we won't do the full hour. We'll just do the first 15 or so minutes to establish the goal so that we're able together to hopefully demonstrate how we would find the goal together to get that clarity for our session. And then once we've got that clarity, we'll pause our demo and invite everyone back for us to debrief a little bit. So I'm just aware that we're not necessarily going to do a whole piece of work today. Does that sit okay with you?
Yeah, it does, Tracy.
Marvelous. All right. Well, thank you again for doing this with me. And if you see me looking up, I'm just keeping a little bit of an eye on the time. And before we start, is there anything else? I'm conscious that we've never met other until right now. So we don't have an awful lot of time for compatibility conversations, but is there anything that would be useful for you for us to feel most comfortable and relaxed to have a bit of a conversation together?
I'm in a good place. I'm ready, Tracy.
Marvelous. Well, thank you so much. I'm in a good place and ready as well. So if we were going to have an hour's conversation together, what might be a topic that you'd like to bring in for us to work on?
Well, I've been thinking all evening about the need to manage my time in such a way that it's regimented without, without losing the element of flexibility. I find that I am naturally a spontaneous person, and that's my flow. But then as I study, and read, and I get exposed to some other forms of learning, I then become desperate to have a regimented approach to my day. I want to be able to do this at this time, this at this time, this at that time. And every time I try to do that, I haven't achieved that goal. And it does impact me. It does impact me. Okay, so just for context, how would I exercise 1 hour every day, meditate for 30 minutes every day, read a book, 10 pages every day, etc., etc. So I find that I do some and I don't do others. Okay, and so I'm wondering, how do I get that, achieve that regiment? Because I know that it is possible. It exists out there. So how do I import it into my own life?
Mm. Mm. It's interesting. I've heard you use 3 key words a few times there of regimented, flexible, and spontaneous. What strikes you about those words?
That's a powerful question, Tracy. What strikes me is that by nature, I am spontaneous. By nature, I am regimented, or I want to be regimented. Yes.
Ah, okay. Well, I love that nature-nurture comparison. So by nature, you're spontaneous, and by nurture, you want to be more regimented. Is that right?
That is correct. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What's important about the regimented element to that piece?
I feel like if I'm regimented, I may be able to achieve more goals. I feel like if I'm regimented, I will accomplish more things.
Mm.
That's how I feel. I feel like I'm underperforming when I depend on the spontaneity. Okay, so I could just wake up when I'm spontaneous, I get it done. So I could do something, achieve what would normally take 6 months or 1 year in 6 days when I'm in the flow.
And I notice, sorry, go ahead.
So, but why do I have to depend on being in the flow? But when I'm not in the flow, I could just leave it. I could leave it for a really long time and not touch it. Right? So I have 6 books. I wrote them. I gave them to an editor. They brought them back to me. I haven't touched them. I have finished writing. They have edited them. All I needed to do is compare what I wrote with the edits and then have them published. But I haven't touched it in 3 to 4 years. Meanwhile, it didn't take me 1 year to write all of them.
So there's something here, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, there's something here around when you're in the flow.
Yes.
Even if you're being spontaneous, you can achieve lots of things.
Right.
And then I'm sensing something happens and you're not in flow.
Right.
And that's when you want to be regimented to ensure that you get these things done. Is that a fair understanding?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So now that we've got a little bit of clarity on that, in the time that we would be working together today, what would be a really good outcome from our conversation around your awareness of that?
I really want to know whether there is any need to keep pursuing regimentation or to just be the way I am.
Ah. Is there a need to pursue regimentation or just be the way you are?
Yep.
And if you explore that question, where are you hoping that would take you?
It will bring me to a point of alignment
Okay.
and acceptance.
Alignment and acceptance. So knowing yourself as you do, how do you know when you are aligned? What do you notice?
There's no struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I do things with ease, even if those things are not easy. But I get it done with ease.
So ease rather than struggle.
That is correct.
Where do you notice the ease?
I would notice the ease in my actions, in the zeal, the passion to get it done, unprovoked, unmotivated, that's it. That's when I notice the ease. But when I start looking for motivation, encouragement, inspiration, I just know that I'm not there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in us doing this piece of work, what could be something that we might have to explore or address or resolve in order to really get you the outcome that you want? Any thoughts on that?
Maybe exploring who I really am. Is there some part of me that I haven't found out?
What a lovely big question, who you really are. And with regards to who you are and thinking about the goal that you want to achieve, what else might we want to explore? I'm just trying to ensure that we've kind of got some clarity here on the work that you'd like us to do.
I find that this is a centerpiece of almost anything I do. So if I get this resolved, it might be a catalyst. It has a way of impacting every other part of my life.
And as we've been talking about this, my experience is I notice sometimes your energy is very high and you're smiling, and then other times your energy is just calming down a little bit. What are you noticing as we talk about this?
Thanks for observing that, Tracy. Yeah, I think the energy, what's the psyche behind the energies, it reminds me of the things I have done easily. And when it drops, I remember the things I haven't done and I feel guilty about.
Mm. Mm.
So that's the switch, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm wondering, just checking in with you, I'm wondering if your energy and your emotions around it could also be something that helps us know whether you've achieved the goal in terms of how you're feeling about it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe because I feel like, life is about constantly evolving, right? So I would have loved to rest on spontaneity, but every time I feel like there's more, so why not look for it, find it, instead of waiting for that flow. All right. I don't know whether it's the books I'm reading, whether it's the experiences I'm having, but I just feel like maybe there's more to life than where I am right now. So when I see the things I should have done, I haven't done, should I say I will do it whenever I can? If I am not doing it, it's because it is no longer a priority. Or should I feel guilty that maybe I'm lazy towards them? Right? So I don't know if I'm coming off clearly, but that's about the reality of my feelings vis-a-vis my emotions around who I am and who I would love to be, as far as being regimented and being spontaneous is concerned.
As I'm hearing you share, Charles, I know we don't know each other very well, but I'm really getting a sense of someone who it feels very important to get the very best out of life and to learn and give your best and get the best out of it. Is that right? Is that important to you?
Spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to check, one other thing that was just sitting in my mind is I heard you talk a little bit about the spontaneity and how sometimes it's there and the flow is there and sometimes it's not. And I'm just picking up a sense of, is there a question here of how might you manage and regulate that a little bit more so that it's more in service of you? Is that part of this, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm just checking with you.
Okay, so here's what is coming up. I realize that when I get into a flow and I follow it through, a lot gets accomplished and finished. So there's no unfinished business. And so there's no guilt because I start and I finish and it's done and it's dusted. So I have to work on avoiding any distraction whenever I get into a flow. Knowing that if I get out of that flow, to come back to that particular thing becomes somewhat of a burden.
Right. That sounds like a very useful insight.
Yeah. Right. It becomes get it done. Don't let it rest till you get it out. Maybe that's something.
Okay. So I'm mindful of our time. I'm just checking in with you, given what we've explored so far, Charles. How would you now like to describe your goal for our coaching work?
Okay, so I came into this conversation looking to find out whether I should be spontaneous in my natural state or work towards regimentation in my nurtured state. And in the course of the conversation, I find that perhaps the real thing would be distraction in the course of the flow, which is why there could be unfinished business. And whenever I think of the unfinished business, I feel guilty about not having gone back to complete those things. Meanwhile, I'm bubbling with something else that I need to do somewhere else. And so if I could concentrate whenever I am in a flow and avoid any form of distraction, I would accomplish the goal and there'll be no need to come back to finish it because it's already finished. That would overcome the guilt. And so I probably shouldn't be working towards being regimented, but maximizing my flow.
Ah, what an interesting shift. So rather than how can I be more regimented, we've moved to how can I maximize my flow?
So,
What do you notice about that shift in the goal?
yeah, so that's, I feel the burden is lesser. I feel lighter. You know, so there isn't a pursuit somewhere. Rather, there is about making the best of what is.
Wow, making the best of what is and maximizing your flow. Before we pause, Charles, is there anything else that feels important to share, just so that we've got clarity of this goal? Anything we've missed?
Not that I can think of at the moment. I feel like I'm somewhere I need to ponder and, you know, marinate on the thoughts that have come out.
Marvelous. Well, and I'm sure more thoughts around that will evolve as the work continues for you.
Absolutely.
Would this be an okay time for us to press the pause button for now, Charles?
Yes, it is, Tracy.
Marvelous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, well, let's invite everyone back. And obviously just inviting Charles to stay in your space for a moment, just allowing your thoughts to carry on and percolate as they might do. And in the time that we've got left, I'm sure we might want to just take a few moments for closing, but it would be lovely to hear any thoughts, any reflections, any questions that are coming up, either about the demonstration or also about any of the things that we've discussed this evening. So I can see some people putting some nice comments into the chat, and absolutely thank you, Charles, for engaging with me to do this. It's always an interesting thing doing a demonstration in front of lots of people, isn't it? So so thank you for doing that. Anything else that anyone wanted to bring in? Any questions, observations about what we've been discussing today? Or even if you want to share anything you're taking away, any insights, anything that was new for you perhaps today, a new consideration, something that's coming up for you around how you might adapt your own contracting and agreements. I've got a question that's just popped in here from Samuel. Must the agreement be summarized by the coach to be complete? That's a great question, Samuel. Obviously, it's useful to have clarity of the goal. So the goal, the agreement, being summarized in some way is very helpful. Personally, my preference is to invite the client to do that summary rather than me. For a lot of reasons, actually. Partly it's for they're the person that actually is doing the work and they know far better than me. But also it's a nice gentle way of holding the client accountable as well. It's their work, you know, so they are summarizing their work that they want to do for themselves. So for us to summarize as coaches, of course, us summarizing as coaches is a very valuable technique, and it's part of our competencies. But we would only probably summarize ourselves when we're really trying to establish clarity of something. If we're feeling that there is perhaps a little bit of a, you know, I'm not clear or they're not clear, or we just want to clarify. But if it's confirmation, and really to sort of embed the clarity of that goal, my personal preference is always to ask the client to do that. I find it's far more impactful for them if they do that. Thank you. So just checking in if there's anything else. We've got a few more minutes.
Femi's hand is up.
So one of the things that happened in that short demo, Tracy, not sure whether you got a chance to go back and review the chat. There were a lot of comments about the energy shifts and how, from your perspective, from the coach's perspective, you actually place that back to Charles and use that as a line of coaching conversation, the energy shift. It was so noticeable that his pitch went up and dropped depending upon context. And from a coach's perspective, I know this is all about competency 3, but we know that no one competence can be taken out in isolation. Competency 5 was demonstrated, maintains presence. And you actually used the opportunity to try and understand what was behind the energy shifts. You know, the shoulders, the leaning into. And that was quite powerful because a number of people commented on that. I just thought I'd share that.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't looking at the chat when we were coaching. That's great. I mean, what's really fascinating about that, Femi, is this is an example of how, in theory, Charles and I were just focusing on competency 3. Yeah, in theory, we're just trying to get clarity of an agreement. And yet, in order to do that, we're also pulling in all of the other competencies. We're pulling in competency 4, cultivating trust and safety, maintains presence. We have to be listening. Some of the questions that we ask around the goal evoke a bit more awareness. And as we saw, ultimately, we got from what we might call the presenting topic to the real topic underneath. And it was wonderful, wasn't it, to see a real shift in Charles's thinking from what he felt was the topic originally to actually what he ultimately wanted to work on. And of course, the temptation in contracting and agreement setting is to rush through that process and grab the first thing that the client says, and off we go, because we have this pressure almost in our own head that we've got to get on with the work, we've got to get on with coaching them. And yet, establishing the agreement is the work. It is the richness of the work. And for some of you who may or may not know this model, is a model that I've shared with Femi, which is very, very simple, called BME. It's one of the first coaching models ever created. It was established by the ICF, and it stands for beginning, middle, and end. I mean, not very scientific. But the beginning, middle, and end is really 3 sections of the piece of work that flow into each other, that actually are of equal significance, equal importance in the piece of work. And if you were to think, therefore, of an hour's coaching conversation, and you were to think of a third, and a third, you could easily spend anything from 10 to 20 minutes establishing the agreement. And then 20 to 25 minutes or whatever, 20 to 30 minutes working the piece of work. And then 10 to 15 minutes at the end, elegantly bringing the piece of work to a close. So I think it's a really interesting thing if we can avoid the temptation to just rush in, ask the client what they want to work on, and then grab it and off we go. Time spent in contracting is really time well spent. So what else have you got?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ahoy, do you have any questions in chat?
So I was just going to say that it's the client's process. So my preference would be for the client to summarize the goal. And like Tracy said, it just shows accountability, and it's easy for the client to own the process. Really. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I've just been looking at the chat. I think we've got most things covered. There's Sunny has put a question in here. What is the longest time anyone has taken to arrive at a clear, smart goal? That's an interesting question. I mean, the reality is you could have someone that actually doesn't get clarity even after a whole coaching session. Because if the topic is very complex for them, if there's a lot of different threads or nuances, sometimes clients rather come into coaching really, really clear and focused on what they want to work on. And other times they don't. It feels like a confused mess in their heads. And that's why they need the coaching to help start to tease those things out. So you could have a beautiful coaching session where you had a whole session that is just in service of getting clarity of what's important to them and what they want to work on. And in fact, in that coaching session, you could get all of the competencies evidenced in service of getting clarity of the goal. I've even heard on more than one occasion as an ICF assessor, I've heard whole hour conversations pass their credential levels and they're just contracting, but they're contracting so richly for complex pieces of work that they're able to actually bring in all of the competencies just in service of that clarity. So it's really something that, of course, we don't want to drag it out and just, go over and over and over something once it's cleared. But equally, it not to be rushed either. There's such rich territory. I mean, imagine with Charles, if we'd have had a conversation that was just focused on how he can be more regimented versus how he could maximize his flow. Energetically, they feel like two very different conversations to me. So, if we were to rush through that, we might not have got to really what's important for Charles to work on. So, yeah, I would encourage contracting any day. So I'm very mindful of the time, Femi. I'm going to hand back
ladies
over
and gentlemen, coaches, credentialed coaches, trainee coaches, coaches on their journey. Wow. This is probably the point that we enable, or we ask people who are able to turn the cameras on so that we can actually get a feel for visuals. I mean, I always like cameras on. What we've covered in 2 hours today took me months and months with Tracy, with my ACC journey, with my PCC journey. Just competency free. You could spend years going through competency tree and still get better. There's one thing that Tracy didn't bring into today, and I'll mention it. Level 4 contracting. But let me not just do a spoiler alert, because maybe that's to come later. Psychological contracting. That's also equally important. And I'm sure Tracy had a reason for not bringing that in, just to focus on levels 1, 2, and 3 today. Because level 4 is actually something that comes when you've mastered the first 3 levels. Wow. So I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop talking. And all I would ask us to do is to show Tracy a great deal of appreciation today for this fantastic session that we've had. This has been wonderful. And I just want to ask everybody to show some appreciation and thank Tracy for all the fantastic knowledge sharing today. Tracy, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
very
Tracy. That
much.
was awesome. That was awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Charles.
You
That was
are
beautiful.
awesome.
Much
Thank you so
insight
much.
and learnings.
Really good, really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank
So,
you. Pleasure.
for those who are still left on the call, this session tonight qualifies for 2 CCE units. However, at this stage, we haven't yet got an automated system for sending out your CCEU certificates. So I've just shared a poll on the screen on your Zoom. You might have it showing up for you now. If you're credentialed and you're on your path to renewal, please help us by completing this poll so that we're able to send out the credential and the CCEU certificates. I always love collecting my CCEU certificates. Whether I'm on my renewal path or not, I'm credentialed. I need evidence that I'm growing and learning as a coach. So please kindly complete the forms. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time tonight. I think at the highest point we had 61 or 62 people online, and it can only get better. Tracy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Be well, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone.
We enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye
so
for
much,
now.
Tracy.
Thank you.
Bye.
You're
So, bye
welcome.
for now, Tracy. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Tracy and Charles. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you so much. And well done,
Bye.
Femi.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, board. Thank you, Femi, and
I just
everyone
need
who put
to
this together.
allow people to complete the poll before I end the session. So I'll stop recording now.